Hola, yo soy Dulce.
Y yo soy Ryujin.
Y porque ustedes lo pidieron, este es el segundo video para aprender más sobre el universo de Onyx Equinox.
Ya llevamos algunos episodios y quizá pasaste por alto algunas cosas.
Así que aquí te diremos las 5 cosas que quizás te perdiste de estos capítulos.
Desde el primer capítulo, una de las cosas fundamentales que vimos fueron los sacrificios.
Y como pudieron darse cuenta, no todos los sacrificios tenían el mismo significado y por lo tanto no tenían la misma metodología.
Pero para hablar más detalladamente al respecto, vamos con una experta.
Y ella es la doctora Kir.
The notion of sacrifice is really core to all Mesoamerican religious beliefs, whether we're talking about the Aztec, the Maya, the Zapotec, the Olmec before them. All of these groups believed in a sort of reciprocal relationship with the gods. They believed that the gods, in various ways, and it varies from culture to culture, gave them life. And so they owe the gods something back. And so we see a lot of sacrifice related to fertility and sort of urging on the growth of corn, etc. Peoples believed that their blood was the food of the gods. A lot of auto-sacrifice. Humans would sacrifice their own bloods, give blood, and burn it for the gods. This was especially true for Mesoamerican kings and queens who had particularly precious blood. For the Aztecs, for example, who are probably the best known for their acts of human sacrifice, we often see sacrifice related to specific calendrical events. Individuals being sacrificed also vary considerably. In most cases, sacrifice would involve a number of religious practitioners and probably political leaders. A political leader, a king, a ruler, they are going to want to get some credit for the sacrificial event taking place. So they often might be involved in a sacrifice, but probably the most important key players would be the religious practitioners themselves. An example of this would be like the Aztec New Fire ceremony, where we know probably a sort of accomplished warrior might have been the one chosen. In other cases, we see a lot of emphasis on the sacrificial victims being people of high status. So, for example, among the Maya, we have a lot of emphasis on captive taking, particularly of other high status individuals. These acts of violence were violent, no doubt, but they weren't barbaric. They weren't without structure and purpose and intention. It's easy to forget that these acts of sacrifice were happening in Mesoamerica at the same time that the Spanish Inquisition is happening in Europe. The people enacting these rituals, these acts of sacrifice, are doing so in their minds for the good of all of mankind. These acts of sacrifice are literally to sustain life, to create a new sun, to perpetuate the human race, and frankly, to perpetuate our world. I wish that people understood that sacrifice wasn't fun or casual brutality. It was really deeply intentional, and it was done with deep purpose on the part of the people that were conducting these sort of ritual acts.
Wow, Ryujin, ¿tú sabías todo eso?
Todo eso no, y por eso es muy bueno tener a un experto para que nos explique. Pero te tengo un dato curioso de uno de nuestros platillos mexicanos, el pozole.
¿Cuál?
Bueno, se ha descubierto que en ocasiones el pozole estaba hecho de carne humana.
Espera, ¿qué?
Sí, se usaba con las personas que capturaban del otro bando y como parte de un sacrificio lo hacían con su carne y se le daba de comer a los que asistían a esa ceremonia. No siempre se hacía así y no por todas las civilizaciones, pero se sabe que se llegó a hacer.
Quizás se va a escuchar un poco feo lo que diga, pero el pozole es muy rico a pesar de saber ese dato.
Oh, es delicioso.
Y vamos ahora a conocer un poco más sobre el juego de pelota.
The ball game is a kind of enigmatic game. Archaeologically, we can say very clearly that ball courts differed considerably across Mesoamerica, so that alone indicates to us that it was played really differently. Most of what we know about the ball game and how it was played in the past comes from iconography. We know that it's probably a two-teamed sport, so kind of an opposition sport, if we want to call it that, because the players involved are often dressed as warriors. It's not exactly warfare, but it seems to sort of be this mimic ritual battle that's happening, not unlike our sports today, I suppose. But I just sort of want to emphasize the fact that the ball game is not American football. This is not just a spectator sport. There is sort of a deeper ritual and religious sort of belief system that's underpinning what takes place. While we think that the ball game was really ritually significant, and increasingly archaeologists have been looking at whether or not the ball game was played more recreational in more commoner spaces. But we know, just like soccer or football gets played in big cities and big stadiums, it also gets played in streets among kids and in sort of fields. If it was always this strictly sort of ritual big event, or if sometimes it was also this more casual game that was being played.
Vaya, la verdad es muy interesante saber que si bien el juego de pelota se jugaba en muchas civilizaciones de Mesoamérica, las reglas y ceremonia que se hacía para realizarlo eran un poco diferentes.
Y ahora yo te tengo un dato curioso, y es que en las primeras Olimpiadas de México se hizo una demostración del juego de pelota durante el evento, y que actualmente en diferentes regiones del país existen grupos de personas tratando de revivir este deporte.
Sería muy bueno intentar practicarlo, igualito que los gemelos de Onyx Equinox, que son parte de una leyenda maya.
Yo estoy practicando.
Igualito.
It's based loosely on the story of Xbalanque and Hunahpu, who are two characters that we traditionally refer to as the hero twins. They are Maya. This comes from the Maya creation myth that we have drawn largely from a text called the Popol Vuh. Their father, unfortunately, perished in the underworld. He gave his seed to the mother of the hero twins in the underworld by spitting into her hand. She gets pregnant, and she goes up to the terrestrial plane out of the underworld and gives birth to two twins. And these are our hero twins, Xbalanque and Hunahpu. They play the ball game and they trick them, and they ultimately sort of win the ball game, and it results in the deaths of the gods of the underworld, who are kind of already dead and gross anyways. But they're victorious against the gods of the underworld, and therefore they sort of avenge their father's death. Their father is often, we call him Hunahpu typically, and he is, according to the legend, he's sort of loosely connected to the Maya maize god. So this is sort of what Yoon and Keen's story is about. The Popol Vuh is an interesting text for us because it comes from the Maya in the probably first written down in the 16th century. The Popol Vuh version of the hero twin myth is probably not the only version of the hero twin myth that existed among the Maya. We're getting one Quiche version of this myth.
Y ahora que sabemos que los sacrificios y la sangre eran un contacto directo con los dioses y que la mitología cumplía un papel fundamental en el día a día de estas civilizaciones, hay un objeto que no podemos dejar pasar por alto: la obsidiana.
La cual no solamente se usaba para las armas, sino también para la creación de artículos ceremoniales. Y sobre esto nos va a hablar un poquito más la doctora Kirby.
The tekpat specifically is a sort of this is a Nahuatl word, right? This is an Aztec sort of specific idea, even though certainly sacrificial blades are widespread across Mesoamerica and important for different reasons. This one is particularly challenging because there's a lot of mythological significance to the sacrificial blade, be it flint or obsidian. For example, we know that the tekpat, the flint blade in particular, is probably associated with the direction north. It's probably associated with Mictlan and Mictlantecuhtli, who is the god of the underworld, and Mictlan is the underworld. So it's sort of associated with death. We often see sacrificial blades, and particularly flint blades, both in images and pictures, as well as actually in physical crania and skulls. We'll see blades sticking out of people's noses and mouths, probably symbolizing death and also sacrifice. A lot of gods are also depicted with flint tongues or blade tongues. It's not clear, I suppose, if they're flint or obsidian always, with blade tongues. Famously, Tzaltecutli, for example, the monument that was found at the base of the Templo Mayor, she has a big sort of blade and stream of blood coming from her mouth. These blades are symbolic of death, the underworld, probably also rebirth, because they're also associated with this great sacrificial event back in the sort of distant mythological past where the gods sacrificed themselves to give birth to the fifth son.
¿Quién diría que esta piedra tendría tanto significado para estas culturas?
El misticismo para estas civilizaciones era muy importante y todas estas creencias se condensaban en una sola cosa: la vestimenta.
Ya que si eras granjero, guerrero o de la realeza, tendrías tu vestimenta típica y para ello la doctora Kirby nos dará más detalles al respecto.
This could include what sort of social class you are, what role you play in society. It could also indicate your ethnic status, your ethnic group. We know, especially today, different ethnic groups wear different kinds of clothing. There are different sects of warriors among the Aztecs, and so we might see an eagle warrior dressed up in an elaborate eagle headdress, or jaguar warrior sort of wearing jaguar garb, and this is sort of specific to the warrior sect. Priests and priestesses often impersonate gods. So sometimes we will see them wearing elaborate paraphernalia that somewhat impersonates gods, that sort of mimics gods, especially on specific ritual days. Kings often are in some of the most detailed clothing. We're lucky to have actually quite a few images of kings, some of them from the colonial period. A lot of feather work in their clothing, so a lot of feathers are incorporated into, in particular, Aztec clothing later on. The act of making clothing was also deeply meaningful, so that as people sewed or weaved in their thread into their cloth, they were actually sort of giving it this really specific energy. Cloth could be this kind of magical material, this really powerful material that could indicate who somebody was, but also sort of held a significance onto its own. Women were typically associated with weaving in Mesoamerica, and this is pretty much true across culture groups. And women's role as weavers was really praised, kind of holy across Mesoamerica. We see this praised through artwork, and we see it written about really favorably later on as well during the colonial period.
Y para tener más información sobre la vestimenta de primera mano, vamos con Isabela Mayo, quien sigue manteniendo hoy en día la tradición del bordado del maya chiapaneco y nos va a comentar algunas diferencias de las tres principales regiones de mayas en México.
Vamos a verlo.
Parte de lo que les quiero enseñar el día de hoy es sobre las diferentes puntadas, vestimentas que hay en nuestra región de Chiapas, México. Lo que cargo puesto ahorita es la blusa tradicional chol, que es de mi cultura. Como ven, son coloridos, pirámides que van en camino, diferentes colores. Estos colores nacen de lo que nos enseñan nuestros abuelos, nuestros ancestros. Los colores verdes, que es de la naturaleza, es muy verde aquí en nuestra región. Colores azules es del panchán. Panchán es el cielo en la lengua chol. Los colores del maíz, que son rojo, amarillo, tenemos maíz morado, el maíz blanco también, y es parte de lo que vamos formando nosotros para crear nuestro bordado. Un bordado muy colorido, como muestro aquí, este es el bordado chol. Ya a través de los colores que acabo de mostrarlo podemos hacer esta forma. Forma también de rombos, esta es parte del bordado tradicional chol, podemos plasmarlo esto en una blusa. Aparte de que tenemos el bordado chol tradicional, tenemos también otras subdivisiones por región. Tenemos bordado, también es chol, pero es de otra región. Esto es de la zona de Yajalón, Chiapas. Y el que tengo aquí es de la zona de Palenque, de Tumbalá, de Salto de Agua. En Chiapas también tenemos otro tipo de textil. Conforme a la cultura maya, forma parte otras subculturas o lenguas, digamos. Aquí chol. Y el segundo sería celtal. Tenemos esta vestimenta, esta es la blusa tradicional celtal con coloridos flores hecho en punto de cruz con este vuelo. Aquí les muestro esto. Este es de la cultura celtal, que también forma parte de la cultura maya. Tenemos aquí esta puntada en tzotzil. Del tzotzil también hay diferentes puntadas. Esta es de la zona de Sinacantán, Chiapas. Una puntada en punto de cruz, y aparte también tenemos diferentes puntadas, depende de la zona. En San Juan Chamula, por ejemplo, es otra puntada. En San Andrés Larrainza es otra puntada. Ahí se trabaja más los textiles. Aquí en especial en la cultura chol trabajamos más el bordado, es bordado en puntada tradicional como es esta o en punto de cruz. Muchas gracias.
Y hasta aquí el video de hoy, esperamos hayan aprendido muchísimo más de este universo.
Déjanos en comentarios qué más te gustaría saber sobre la mitología o información de esta serie.
Recuerden ser valientes porque la aventura los espera en Onyx Equinox.
No te lo pierdas solo por Crunchyroll.